frame or start the conversation with some basic appreciation for sound at all as a principle, as a principle. And we may have a kind of pedestrian understanding of sound. Like we live in a city, and in any given moment, there's like 5 layers. If you kind of stop and listen a bit, like 5 layers of sound, of noisy things um, happening. I had a student once who spent much of his life on a boat out in the ocean. And and then he was an outdoor educator in Alaska, right? And so you can imagine the kind of sounds that he was accustomed to. Right? I mean, they're probably pretty awesome ones that come to mind. Like, yeah, that's my kind of sound, you know. I could get on board with a bit of wind and wind through the trees and rivers and that sort of thing. And he said when he came to the city, he noticed 5 different kind of layers of strata happening. Um, and so that there's that version, right? Like the sound of our kind of modern environment. And then let's go a little further down the ladder of consideration into more like the sounds that James, the fellow I was just telling you about, was accustomed to. And it's a bit more wind through the trees and the sound of rushing waters, or maybe the sound of the ocean, lapping of waves, right? And even as I name these sounds, you might find yourself a little like lulled into like, that's my kind of sound, you know? Or or something like crickets, right? Like the sound of crickets as as a kind of enchantment there. In fact, when cricket season starts, this is your assignment to to listen to them with open wonder. And you might hear a few little reverberations from the Big Bang in their longing. So the nature strata, that's another dimension of a sound relationship. And then there's the soundtrack that we carry with us in the form of narrating our day or our opinions about self or life events, and which is of probably even more consequence, but a little more slippery. Like, where do you put your finger on that voice? It seems to have a life of its own and is the soundtrack for our life process and the decisions and whether we got married or not, and etc. Like that, there's great consequence to that verbiage. And it's said that like if we speak ill of someone, if we speak ill of someone to another, that's of like the most potentially the most like one of the damaging forms of affront. Like it can't get erased from from the ear that listened, right? Mm. So there's a kind of consequence or life to this narrated sound. And yoga goes a little further. Like if you keep following this thread of subtlety or like considerations around the sound equation or the sound possibilities or sound lattice, there's an even subtler dimension to that sound to sound that's not calibrated to the particular frequencies that this instrument, your ears, are intended to pick up so much, right? But nonetheless can be heard. and detect it. And scriptures like Shiva Samhita describe it like an interior sound or an inner sound that sounds like flutes, or it sounds like like a waterfall, or it sounds like kettle drums, or crickets, or crickets, or a flute. You can hear Krishna's flute in there, and you could hear, or a deafening roar, and it lays it out in a particular progression, here to there to there. One text describes the Sahasrar Nama Lalita, I believe it is, but no quote there. Says, in describing the goddess, around her dense black hair, the bees, the bees, feel this, the bees were humming in swarm around her dense black hair. The bees were humming in. Can you feel the enchantment going on in such a space? There's a subtler dimension to sound. That's a big idea, and um, the kind of the legend goes that the earliest yogis, the rishis, and what rishi means to see, this word like find your drishti, like drishti, your gaze, like it's related. It's related. So the rishis, they appeared, they had a vision of the deeper cosmos, and they brought back some of their findings in the form of mantra. So, you're curious about the deeper architecture of the universe and kind of the vibrations that go on there, and how you can synchronize or line up or harmonize with those forces. I have a song for you. It's called, Gayatri Mantra. I have a song for you. It's called Mahamrityunjaya Mantra. I have a song for you. It's called Om Namah Shivaya, right? So depending on what kind of frequency you're trying to sync up with, the mantra is one such pathway to kind of communing or developing a relationship with this subtler architecture of sound, right? And if that sounds mystical and esoteric, it's because it is, right? Like, yeah. And that's part of, or that's accounted for. It's not so much a question of if there are subtle dimensions, but like what are the means by which we can approach and gain resonance and infuse our life with meaning, because we understand it, or we're taking into consideration a fuller picture, right? And mantra is a way of like approaching the fuller picture. Huh? Yeah. As a spiritual practice in general, right? So